Viewers over the world, I welcome you to the Meliora Online School of Law. Of course, we have a belief that ignorance of law is never a defense. Have you ever heard of Lord Langdale in the case of Knight versus Knight? Of course, we have to Google, we have to rotate around the globe and see where was Lord Langdale, in which case was he, that was Knight versus Knight, what did he talk about? So today, we're gonna look at the concept of the three certainties in the law of equity and trusts. Of course, I know there are a lot of people that keep on asking themselves, please, what are the three certainties? How are they important in the law? So basically, this is your video, this is your episode. Now, Lord Langdale, in the case of Knight versus Knight, he introduced that for there to be a valid trust, then there must be the concept of the three certainties. So basically, it is Lord Langdale in Knight and Knight who introduced the concept of the three certainties and said, wait, for there to be a certainty or for there to be a trust and it is valid or it is considered valid, then the issue of the three certainties must be, or the three certainties must be seen. Now, when you look at the word three certainties, of course, I always tell you it has three. Of course, those are three in number. And then certainties, basically, when you look at certainty, that one has the concept of certainty or what we call clearness. So, for us to say that a trust is valid or is considered a valid trust, remember, if I take you back at the historical development of the law of equity and trust, we see that there was what we called the medieval era or the era of the Middle Ages, where we see that there was a conflict between the people of common law or the common law judges and the people who had chosen now to run to the king, and the king in return had to appoint the chancellor. And remember, the major factor that caused the issue of the decline of equity or people losing much love in equity was the introduction of the doctrine of use, basically the doctrine of use. And you're going to see that the issue of use was to do with the issue of trusts. So basically the rise of trusts in common law or in England in the medieval era led to the decline of common law. Now, we want to know what makes a trust a valid one. So one of the things that make a trust a valid one is, one, there must be the presence of the three certainties. As Lord Langdale in Knight versus Knight told us, we have to know now what are these three certainties. So these three certainties, basically, these are things that must be visible until they have to be seen. If they are not seen or heard or felt, then it is not a trust. Remember, before I go to the three certainties, it is important to note that in a trust, there are always three people. There is a settler. Usually, a settler is one that gives out the property. Then, two, there must be a trustee. Then, a trustee is the person who is vested with the property for the benefit of another person who is known as the beneficiary. So, there are three people. So, one of the most common trusts created in Uganda and of course in the world at large, it is what we call a will, because you always see the will which is made by either a testator or a testatrix. I told you a testatrix, that is the person that has left a will but is a woman. Then a testator is always a man. Then majorly there is always property. Then there is always the beneficiary to the said property. So for us to say that maybe the will is valid, or for us to say that any trust that has been created is a valid one, then the three certainties must be seen. The first one is certainty as to intention. Two, certainty as to subject matter. And three, it is certainty as to object. Now, for us in Uganda, where I hail from, we have a security organ called ISO. ISO. So now ISO is Internal Security Organization. So basically, if you want to understand the certainty, it's good that you know if one is intention, the other is subject matter, the other is object, then that is ISO. So basically that is ISO. So we have to know what is certainty regarding to intention. Now, certainty regarding to intention, basically, that is where we see that for us to say that a trust is a valid trust, then the intention must be clear. The intention of the testator, the intention of the settler must be clear as to who he intends to give and what he intends to give. So the intention must always be clear. Now, when you look at the case of Adams and Kensington, Adams and Kensington, it's very good that you have to look at that case. I always give you a look at class cases because they are very important in your further readings. Here we just highlight. So read the case of Adams and Kensington, or versus and Kensington. That is a case that points out clearly, tells us that you know what, where words are not clear, of course, a trust will not be a valid one. And of course, we can never talk about the issue of a trust and the issue of certainty and the issue of intention as to being certain, and you leave out what we call the famous Vandervelde number 2 case. It is very important that you go read that case. That is the Vandervelde trust number 2 case. It talks about clearly the issue of certainty regarding to intention. Now we go to certainty regarding to subject matter. Now, certainty regarding to subject matter usually is there must be clarity, or it must always be clear. The settler must always be clear. If it is a will, the testator stroke testatrix must always make it clear as to what is going to be given, what is going to be given, what is he or she giving out. For example, is it land? Is it money? If it is money, up to what quantity? If there are shares in a company, how many shares? Basically, that is what we call the certainty regarding to subject matter. That one talks about the property that is going to be given. It must be clear. So where the property is not clear, then you can never come out and say that this is what we call a trust. So it is very important and it is very crucial that you read the case of Palmer. The case of Palmer versus Simons. So that case of Palmer versus Simons, it is very important in explaining the issue of the quantity of the certainty of the subject matter. Now there is also an interesting case which I've actually recalled. That is a case that tells us that where the certainty of the subject matter is never clear, then the issue of the trust will not be a valid one. So that is the case of Sprange versus Bernard. Read that case of Sprange versus Bernard. Now, interestingly, the case of Sprange versus Bernard, it comes out and tells us that there was a testatrix. I've already told you that a testatrix, this is a woman or a lady that leaves property in their will. So there was a testatrix who had bequeathed. When I talk of bequeathing, it's like giving their husband euros, that is 300 euros, in case they die, to use it. But if they don't use it in their lifetime fully, they have a right to give the remainder to the relatives, that is the brother and the sister. So now court came in and ruled and said that, you know what, there was no certainty. There was no certainty regarding the subject matter of what you intended to give, because you considered as a whole. These issues of as a whole, bulk, what and what, they don't form part of they don't form a valid trust. And then lastly, we have to look at the certainty as to object. Now, the certainty as to object, when you look at object, basically, the certainty as to object means that what you're giving out, who you are giving out, must be clear. Basically, the beneficiary, that you, the settler, you must be aware, you must be sure of who you are giving the property. So the beneficiary must be clear. If the beneficiary is never clear, then you can never come out and tell us that this is a valid trust. Actually, that was clearly talked about in the case of night versus night. So you must know that where the beneficiaries are not known or are not ascertained, then we cannot say that there is a valid trust created. Of course, that is what we call the concept of the three certanities as known in the law of equity and trust. We meet again in our next episode. Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe.